Good morning, y'all. We are here today in Texas on a cold, rainy, and windy day, but we're going to try to ignore that and pretend like it's not happening. We are at Comanche Lookout Park on the northeast side of San Antonio, and already from the start, we can see walking up this man-made path here that there's remnants of what appears to be some sort of at least some erosion of water affecting these rocks here. Not quite river rocks, but there's a hint that as we increase in elevation and get more towards the top of this hill, that some water runoff of some sort has occurred. So that's our first indication. But let's keep going. Here off to the side of the trail, we have a lot of rock deposit. See if I can zoom in here. All the way down as far as you can see. And it's just all sorts and shapes of rocks, all semi-rounded. There are some that have more sharp edges to them. However, you can see that there has been what appears to be a chemical erosion happening. I'm not sure if this particular rock is limestone or not, but you can see that there's been possibly some chemical erosion either from rain or whatever was in the water that has broken down some of this rock. We can see some of that on this one here. Actually looks like it may have been actually broken. Let's see what else we got here. We've got this one here as well. It appears to have been sitting here for quite some time with a lot of porous holes, as well as this one over here. We have a similar thing happening with this one. This appears to be, again, some sort of chemical erosion, probably from the rainwater having some sort of chemical or acidity to it to some extent, and it just sits there and slowly eats away at that rock. Again, off to the side of the path here, we have what looks like a stone put in place, likely to change the angle of the flow. So that's the area that we were just in. So coming across here, I believe that they probably put this here to change the path of this existing creek bed. And you can see it winding up through the trees here. Let me get you a closer look. And that winds all the way up into the trees, way up in this direction, all the way back there. Alright, so we're actually going to go up there via the walking path and see what we can find from the top end. So as we're walking up this path here, I'm noticing on the ground that there's plenty of water erosion. On this man-made path, you can see all these lines where the water has run through and cracked. We're about to get up to this one up here. But what's really interesting about everything we've learned in class so far is how water really does shape everything. We can see that there's a lot of runoff happening over on this side as well. I don't know how well the camera's picking this up, but there's actually like somewhat of like a culvert, like a dip on this side. Now at first glance I was like, that's probably just, where they built the path up, but we can also see that there's water that runs down through here. There's actually some rocks being deposited back in there. You see this, I'm get my finger here, this shape happening coming down this way. Some of that is present here, and then it crosses over this path. And you can see the ground is washed out here as well. Let's see if I can get down here. You see that water run off straight through there. And you can see that water run off straight through there as well. So it's very obvious that this water is not only running down this pathway, but it used to cut through there and come across this path as well. Alright, I was making my way up this hill and I found yet another block in the road or in the path to divert water. So here we can see exactly what we saw earlier, and it's a lot more evident that this rock is splitting that water pathway. And you can see all the way down this hill a ton of pebbles and rocks have been deposited all along here. And you can also see that that water is eroding all the material along the edge here. Let me see if I can get my camera a little bit lower so you see how steep that is. So it's literally eating away at this path. So it's all coming down and it's hitting the edge of this. Now, one of the things we spoke about or learned about in class was about waterfalls, and typically how you'd see the water coming across out and pulling and creating an area down here and eventually would erode underneath. And we're seeing a similar thing but happening in the other direction. Our water flows actually coming in this way and eating away at this material underneath. And you see how soft and wet this material is. Let me get my phone to focus. And it's actually just stripping away at this road structure here, and it's starting to crack this area, and this will eventually fall off just as it has here and down there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and actually walk up this path that we just looked at and see what we can find further up here. One of the things I was most excited to do for filming this class was check out the water erosion in this area. When I found Comanche Lookout on Google Maps, I noticed that the way it was sitting on top of the hill, my fingers would basically be water erosion lines going down the hill. And it was very evident. You can see that on the map. A lot of those have turned into man-made trails, but that doesn't mean that the water's not flowing on them now. Which is very interesting to me, and I was really excited to come out here and check that out in person and see kind of what exactly that looked like. Alright, so here we are walking up that path, and you can see just as far as we can see, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here, but as far as we can see, there is all of this rock being deposited along this path. And the reason that we can tell, or one of the main reasons we can tell, that it's from water coming this way is not only because it's trying to find the path of least resistance coming through here. There's not really any of it besides the small deposited ones as well from higher water flow at some point on either side. So we've got green grass, moss, trees all through here, and then nothing besides river rock. And again, the same thing, grass, trees, moss, everything through here, and then nothing again besides river rock. So that tells me that water definitely flows through here actively. Not only did it used to, but it actively did. So what I would expect to see as we get further to the top of this hill, at the very top, I would expect large boulders or large rocks that have slightly smaller pieces of them broken off that are sitting on the ground. And that's where all these would be coming from. So we're heading over to a path cross here. Oh, look, but here's something interesting as well. Again, you can see the water just tearing through this rock here. Now, this is obviously some sort of compact rock boulder material to build up the area underneath the path, but that doesn't mean that it's not affected by this water erosion. And you can see it just eating into all this material here. Now it looks like the water level doesn't get quite as high, but it does appear that it rolls off of this pathway as well and eats away at some of this material here. As you can see, it's not really happening as much up there as it is right here, which indicates this is probably some sort of passageway or cross point for the water coming down. So not only is it eating away at this, but it's also affecting this as it comes by. All right, and that's our viewpoint from the other side. Let me just show this contrast of that washout there. But we're going to continue on up this path. This is a man-made path here. I think we're getting closer to the point where we saw in the very beginning of the video. Let's find out. And here's something really cool. You don't really see that often. Here in its natural habitat is this carton of milk. So that's where we get our dairy from, y'all. All right, so I'm here at the top. This is obviously the main feature of the park, is the Comanche Lookout Post. But we're not going to be reviewing that today, but pretty cool for me to see, so I'm going to take a minute and look at it while I'm up here, and then I'm going to continue on with the video. All right, guys, so it's pretty windy out here, so hopefully you can hear me. So after combing over this area and where the tower is, looking at this area over here and all these rocks, I'm almost wondering, all the rocks actually came from the construction of this outpost at some point. I'm not a rock expert by any means, But looking at some of these that were built, or this was made out of, this was built out of, a lot of those rocks are also the same ones I'm finding on the ground. I'll flip this camera around so you can see some of these. But all in here are very similar rocks as well as trash. And all along here are those same rocks. So I almost wonder if at some point when they built this, these were all the rocks that were nearby, so rocks, boulders, whatever was near here that they used to make this, and all of this extra was either on the ground up here where these pathways are and didn't used to be, and all of this is just leftover material that they never used. I also think that some of it is these larger boulders being eroded as well. Hard to say because I don't know enough about the rocks in this area and what's naturally here. But what I can say is that it's definitely coming from this hill. So if we assume that all the rocks were already at the top of this hill, there's our tower. There's where we just were at the top. And you can see it actively eroding down this hill. You see these dark spots. Kind of hard to see in the video. But if I get a little bit lower, you can see that depth change there. This is actually a washout from a higher area down to a lower area. And it does that quite a few times. It does it here, it does it there, there, and there, as well as this one here and that one there. And it continues to do that all the way down this hill. Now you see that they placed this rock here at some point, and a lot of the buildup is happening on this side, and then you can see this line decrease down as the water hits this rock, flows down this way and gets diverted. And when it gets diverted, it does so with what appears to be an incredible amount of speed that it's actually eroding away this outer wall as well. So let me go ahead and go down here and get you the reverse view. So we see water coming down, eroding all these. You can see that it has a natural dip here. This is a little bit raised right there, as well as this side over here is also raised. So it's flowing down, it's coming through here, and then some of it's going this direction. You can see that in the rock, but a lot of it was coming up here at some point and then eroding along that back side. And then here's where it gets really interesting. You can see it actually come around and eat away at this outer wall. Not only is it eating away at the outer wall, it's eating away at the rock as well. And has even changed the color of it, which I find very interesting. You see all the divots and holes and the porosity in this rock from that water beating into it for however long it has been. Also along the top here, we have a bunch of these ridges. I know the camera's being difficult with me right now. There we go. You see all these ridges along the top. That to me looks like water has come over the top of this rock at some point and has eroded in a lined fashion or a wave fashion. I could be wrong on that, but that's what it looks like to me. Okay, we're going to continue on. All this so far has been talks of just water. And very basic water erosion. So let's see if we can find a more specific word than erosion at some point here. All right, I have found the area that we initially started to look at, where that big rock was over the path. And this is the top of that area. So right from the start, we have a man-made placement for this bench to look out and see this incredible view. I believe this park is like 1,300 elevation or something like that. You can see all of this crazy rock formations washing away, eating through. Looks like we have a cool Texas sage right in our way. I think that's a Texas sage. It looks like it. And it goes all the way down here. And so where I parked and filmed the very first part of the video was actually right by this stoplight, a little to the west of my finger. Or the left of my finger is actually the east. But you can see all the way down this hill goes quite far. It drops off there and goes even further down in this backside back there. That's my finger. So let's go down there and see if we can take a look. Alright, so you can see I was just up there. That's the Texas sage right there in the middle. You see lots of deposit of rock down here. And what's interesting is a lot of it has pushed out entirely and left us with this semi-hard, almost like I think it might be like a lychee. Kind of like a sand deposit. I'm not quite sure. But it's soft, but it is more dense than mud. And it has eroded lines all the way down in through here and completely washed them away. What's also interesting is you can see it's done so in increments, almost in steps. You have these little pools of rocks all along this. So the water traveled down and hit a spot where it didn't have enough force maybe to go over the next point, and so it pooled up enough. As more water eventually got in there, then it broke through and went to the next one, and then it broke through and went to the next one, and it continued that process all the way down as far as we can see. Again, when I was reading through these chapters and in this class in general, I've always been fascinated with water. So when we got to this section of water, I was really excited to cover it because water is just truly amazing and forms literally everything that we see in our world. And it is to be feared and also respected at the same time. You can see from this viewpoint, here's a hard break where all that water that just pulled up along the whole time coming down this hill in each of those sections now has a massive amount of force to wash out even further into what probably would be like a mini waterfall happening here. Let me see if I can get a better shot here. So this is our cliff face of where like a waterfall would form. Granted, it's very small in this case, but you can see the effects of exactly what we learned over time. This is our first edge. So in our example of Niagara Falls, right, this is our first edge, and this is actually further in, and you can see that there. So it's actually eating back into, because it is coming down and splashing into this area, which is then eroding back up off the back wall each time, almost like a scooping effect underneath. Let me get a different camera angle here and see if we can cover it better. Alright, so if we look at it from this perspective, this is from the top down, somewhat on the back. Here's our initial point. You can see how much more it's washed away this back edge underneath here. I can show you that by putting my fingers in there. So it's hitting down here, all that water and all that force, and it's actually splashing back into this area here, which means that at some point this edge here probably was over here or over here, over here, or this entire thing wasn't here at all. It eventually just ate away at it, right? Ate away, and worked its way all the way back to here, which means it'll continue to do so until it hits this hole, and that will create an even larger washout here and an even steeper and deeper valley here at the bottom for that water to splash into. So that's pretty neat. We're about halfway down the hill. I don't know that we'll go all the way down, but this next section is a larger scale version of what we just talked about. So if I go and squat down here, you can see exactly how deep this washout is. And it's pretty incredible all along this side and this side over here. You can see that water has literally just kind of snaked through here on this path, washed out that side, hit this side, hit that side, washed out that side. Pretty cool to see. Not quite the size of a stream or river that we talked about in our chapters, but we can see cut banks and point bars on a small scale at least. So we see as the water comes through here and rotates through, that's a really cool rock, by the way. I'm gonna take a look at that. Comes through here and eats away this outer wall. That's gonna form our cut bank, because it's literally cutting the bank, right? And then it's gonna flow this way. And this here is actually basically what would be considered a small scale point bar. if we look at it from this upward angle. Not quite as dramatic as one you'd see in like a river, but here's another smaller example of it. So you can see it forming, right? So cut bank. This is somewhat of our point bar. Again, not the best example because it is such a small scale, but you get the gist of it. So I'm gonna go back up this hill. You also see what looks like a side path of water has taken this way. At first I thought it was a walking path, but the rocks being pushed this way tells me that at some point the water turns from there and goes this way, and maybe used to go this way, or this has washed out so far that this is actually what's underneath all of this rocks and grass, which appears to be the case based on how this soil looks over there. But I'm gonna go back to the top of the hill because I saw another area I want to talk about. All right, I just got to a really cool spot, and I want to say ahead of time I apologize for the wind noise, but we're gonna go over there in a second. But we can see here a clearing in the trees, and it drops off just past that, which tells me this is the beginning of the erosion that we saw on the map, where my fingers were the different paths to go down this hill. This is obviously one of those paths. That was obviously another one of those paths, and all the ones that we looked at so far have been those paths that I've seen on Google Maps. So I'm very curious to see how this looks when we arrive over here. All right, check out that rock. That's got some cool stuff happening to it. We'll come back to that. There's another one. All of these are actually really cool. We'll come back to those. We're going to take a look at this area over here. So we can already see this is very obviously a man-made wall, and probably to help stop some sort of, I don't know, maybe water erosion, the topic of this whole thing so far. Interesting. So let's take a second to check out our awesome view here. It's pretty incredible. Again, I think we're at like 1,300 something feet. Trying to see what we can see. There's the Tower of the Americas out there. Anyway, focus, all right? Rocks. Let's take a look at all the rocks that are here and see why they're here and how they came to be. All right, so this by far has been the largest washout that I've seen at this park. I feel like this is probably going to be the highlight of a combination of all the things that we've seen so far, all put into one, because we have directly behind me is a large washout literally sitting inside of it. So if you come here, you'll see this exact spot because it's just below the rock surface here, the man-made rock surface. There's this giant washout. So let's get another viewpoint and talk about it. All right, here we go. So now we're actually facing the direction that we just were, but without me in the way. And we can see already incredible erosion happening here. Absolutely incredible. All over this thing. And all of this appears to have been either from water or possibly wind, given that we're on the side of this hill here. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this is wind mixed in with water. But again, like we talked about in class, we have a very clear water line. So we're going to have like a waterfall effect happening off the edge of this. And you can see here, this is actually run down and come into here. So one of the things that we talked about was that water would seep into cracks. You can see it happening here. Would seep into the cracks of rock or cracks of anything, really, anything of any size that water can get into, which is pretty much most things. And once it's in there, it would then likely freeze, which it's more susceptible to do in this location. Again, because it's so open and exposed to the air and wind, it's more likely to freeze than areas in places without wind or cold temperatures at all. Anyway, so getting back to our point, we can see that water has run down at all of these points, all of these cracks. It's worked its way in, and then it froze to some extent, expanded and created its own space. And over probably millions of times of doing that, has created these large cracks. And once those large cracks are created, it creates everything in that path to be super brittle, where it can fall down. And so now at the bottom we have this base of all of these smaller rocks that have fallen or dropped off or broken off of here at some point. It'd be really cool if there was a large one similar to this one that I could just find like a spot that it fit or something. I haven't seen it yet, but I might do that off camera and see if I can find one. Yeah, very cool to see. So basically we have water erosion likely happening in this path now that this wall is here, which is probably why this has gotten as bad as it has. Because if they didn't have this wall here, the water could come along anywhere along the surface and work its way down. I'm sure some of it still gets underneath over there, but I don't think that all of it will. So I'm sure some comes along that side, but the majority of it's coming along this way, which is why this exists to begin with. Now, was that always like that? Did this wall that they put in here make this happen? I don't know. But you can very clearly see that because that wall is there, that's why this side over here is eroded so drastically in comparison. Look at this, this is ridiculous. In comparison to the other side, which is pretty well intact, doesn't have a whole lot of erosion happening at all on that side. But it clearly does on this side, right? So I'm thinking that because that wall was placed there, that's what caused this drastic formation to form. Wow. I think that's why. I think that's why this exists. I think without that wall, this likely wouldn't be as bad as it is or exist at all. Or it would just look a lot different and we wouldn't even recognize it to know the difference. All right, so moving back to the top of the hill, let's take a look at some of these rocks here. So we talked about it earlier. Awesome to see. We talked about it earlier at the very, very beginning of this video. At the base of the path, there was a bunch of small rocks that we looked at that had some porosity. I discussed how they could be from rainwater. This is a great example. I believe we talked about it being calcium carbonate that is in the rainwater that comes down because of carbon dioxide in the air. Gets mixed with the rainwater and actually eats away. I'm assuming this might be limestone, judging by the looks of it. But super cool. We've got basically like some fossilized structures in here. Depending on how long it's been here, could determine what all is actually inside of this rock. We've also got some tracks, as well as a bunch of snail shells or seashells, which is interesting to see here. Could they indicate that this was all underwater at one point? Well, we know that it most likely was. It very obviously was. But what's really cool about this, aside from the deja vu that I just had filming it, is that there's not a whole lot of those up here. At least not in this size. So it's really cool to see that we have some actual fossilized structures in these rocks. That these have been here. I don't want to touch it too much, but these have been here probably for, I want to say, at least thousands of years. Hard to say. Again, I'm not a geologist or an archaeologist or anything. I'm just in this class to learn, and I'm learning as I'm doing this, which is really fun. So this one appears to have probably not been laid on the ground exactly on a horizontal, like perfectly flat level surface, because the whole rock itself is bent at an angle. And I know that they formed a lot of this to make this bench, but I'd be curious to see which side was facing up during it, because a lot of these are washed into here at an angle. None of them are just straight down. This one's also at an angle. This one's also at an angle. So that's pretty neat to see. Let's go take a look at this one over here as well. This one's very similar, also very cool to look at. I've always been fascinated with not just rocks, but just general erosion, I guess, which is why I use the word so often in this. I currently work in the oil field where I do inspections on equipment that is subject to chemical and water erosion in iron and metals. So this is very cool to see also happening naturally, right? Everything that I do is man-made, chemically produced because of all the ridiculous stuff we're doing to our earth. Anyway, that's a tale for another time. So again, recapping, calcium carbonate rain in general, creating a chemical breakdown of the rock, basically like acid, and each time that a drop of rain hits it, it just eats further and further and further into it. And again, you can see that the angles of these, not all of them are perfectly straight. So that makes you question either the angle of the rain hitting it, which means maybe it was on the side of a hill. So it may have been sitting flat, but the rain was coming in at an angle because it was on the side of a hill. It could have been sitting at an angle, we don't know. But nearly every inch of this, besides where they polished it to be benches, is worn away in a very natural way. They may have also put these two together. This is like it could be two separate rocks. So if we look at this crack line here, they polished this bottom half one to be a bench and then put this other one on top of it. So there's a very good chance that these came from two different areas entirely, or they're all just sections of the same rock that they found up here at some point. Let me see what else I can find. I know that we're not interested in the history so much as the actual grounds themselves and everything, but I'm gonna put this here so you can pause on it if you'd like. And we're gonna move along. See what else we can find. All right, I just want to take a quick minute before we move along here. I realized as I was getting ready to leave that some of these trees down here are actually discolored. Flip this around. You can see that there are some more gray, ashy looking trees. I'm not entirely sure that those are not just a different type of tree and that's why they are the color that they are. But without knowing, I'm making just a quick assumption. We could say that maybe there's a possible path of either too much water from this runoff that killed those because it oversaturated them and actually just drowned them out, or the opposite, right? All this other green stuff, all this green foliage has enough water, and everything that's gray and dead looking never got enough water to survive. Hard to say without knowing enough about the foliage in this area and what all the differences are between them, but just thought I'd point it out before we move on. I think we're going to wrap this up here soon because the rain is coming. My watch showed a drop in barometric pressure, which means I probably need to leave. So I'm going to see what else I can find and hopefully not get rained on. All right, I think that's it. I think I have enough footage and video of the place. Hopefully I talked enough about specific topics and used hopefully enough vocabulary of things that we learned. I kind of tend to get overexcited when I do stuff like this, and I just get more fascinated and forget all of the terminology and lingo. But hopefully I explained it well enough that you think that I've learned something in your class. I hope that anybody watching this also learned something. I like to encourage everybody to go outside, explore, go hiking. Going up and down these paths, being slightly out of breath is reminding me that I need to get out and hike more as well. So I'm going to try to live by that advice I'm giving you, so I also get out and explore more as well. So that being said, I guess this concludes my video for the final for geography class here at Comanche Lookout Park in San Antonio, Texas. Y'all have a good day.